There were already two men sitting at my desk when I walked back from my lunch break. Both wore expensive dark suits, far too formal for a Wednesday afternoon. One of them was leafing through my handwritten sticky notes, inspecting them like evidence in a lawsuit. The other was holding my company-issued laptop, holding the machine as if it were contaminated. I did not ask them what they were doing. I simply stood there and watched. "Sir," the one with the narrower tie said, without looking up to meet my eyes. "We have been instructed to collect all company assets immediately. Your security access has been revoked." It was funny, really. I still had the administrative application open on my personal mobile phone, the admin application that remained completely hidden from my colleagues. The green text on the screen showed that my connection was still active, showing root access confirmed. I gave them a polite nod, set down my takeout salad near my stapler, and told them I needed to grab my jacket. I did not actually grab a coat. Instead, my hand reached under the wooden frame of my chair, removed the solid-state drive taped under the seat, slipped it into my pocket, and walked out. I walked past the silver-framed inspirational quote hanging outside the Human Resources Department, which read that we are all one family working together. It was a joke so cruel and hollow that it felt like a piece of satirical performance art. 7 minutes later, while I was waiting in the slow line at the underground parking garage ticket machine, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was not a text message. It was a system log from my server room, log 1723, unauthorized instance access attempt detected. Log 1724, privilege escalation to level 3 initiated by user system. Log 1725, core system asset Aegis initiated contingency protocol. Log 1726, failover countdown commenced, T-9 hours and 15 minutes. I looked up. The driver in the sedan behind me was chewing his gum aggressively, staring at his dashboard. The parking attendant took my ticket and waved me through without making eye contact. Everything seemed completely normal on the surface, but nothing was normal anymore because Aegis was never supposed to trigger its contingency mode. Not unless someone tried to overwrite the core database architecture, and if someone had obtained credentials high enough to trigger that specific protocol. It meant they were not just exploring the folders. They were attempting to take total ownership of the entire system. None of the executives upstairs, with their multi-million-dollar exit packages and their clean white collars, understood what Aegis actually did when it panicked. They thought they had dismissed me cleanly, like removing a typo from a budget spreadsheet. What they had actually done was trigger a silent tripwire buried so deep in the network infrastructure that even the consultants who drafted the security compliance manuals had never heard of it. The best part of it all was that they were going to be pleading for my help in less than 9 hours. The first telephone call came from Gavin, the senior DevOps engineer. His name flashed across my phone screen while I was loading my dirty clothes into a commercial dryer at the 24-hour laundry place down on 6th Street. I was there because my new apartment did not have any washer hookups yet. Gavin was a young guy who used to bring me a double espresso with 2 sugars every single Tuesday morning. Now, his voice was shaking so hard that he sounded like a nervous teenager. "Alan, we have a massive disaster over here," he said, his voice cracking. I pulled a warm sheet of fabric softener from my basket. "You mean besides the fact that you scraped my profile out of the corporate directory like mold off a piece of bread?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then he spoke rapidly. "The client synchronization system just duplicated 26,000 invoices across our European database node. The entire billing database is locked in an infinite loop. No one can bypass it or shut it down. The legal department is shouting, and the clients are panicking." I flipped a silver coin between my knuckles. If it landed on heads, I would hang up the phone. If it landed on tails, I would let them burn. The coin dropped to the concrete floor, rolling into a dusty corner near the lint trap. "Aegis is awake," I said in a quiet voice, "and she does not take betrayal lightly." "What did you say?" Gavin asked, confusion in his voice. "Nothing," I replied, standing up to close the dryer door. "How is the automatic backup handling the cache migration system?" Gavin did not answer because he did not know. He did not know because that backup architecture did not exist on any official layout. I had built it years ago using root permissions only, giving it a name inspired by ancient protection for a reason. "You need to come back to the office," Gavin whispered, his voice full of dread. "I do not need to do anything," I said. "Alan, this will destroy the contract with Geneva." I looked out the dusty glass window of the laundromat. Across the street, a guy in a giant promotion costume was arguing with a transit officer. Somewhere in Geneva, a high-ranking executive was probably watching a real-time monitor screen, watching the performance line plunge down into the red. "Tell the board," I said, "that if they want Aegis to calm down, they need to send someone who has more authority than a panicked developer." Then I pressed the red button to end the call. 4 hours later, Geneva was completely offline. This was not a minor lag or intermittent connection drop. It was a complete flatline. Their end-of-quarter audit database pipeline, which was built entirely on our proprietary data interface, was spitting out null packets like it had contracted food poisoning. I did not hear about it from Gavin this time. I heard about it from Owen, my former intern. Owen sent me a short text message with a single line of text. "They are all gathering in the main conference room," the message read. "Stephen just shouted your name like it was an insult." It made me smile to myself in the middle of the grocery store aisle. I was holding a pint of premium vanilla bean ice cream at the time, and the cashier looked at me as if I had completely lost my mind. I left the ice cream on the shelf and walked out into the cool evening air. Now the game was playing out, and although I was looking at it from a distance, the chessboard was still entirely rigged in my favor. See, when you spend over 28 years building a system from the ground up, patching its weak spots, configuring its pathways at 2 o'clock in the morning, while the rest of the office is asleep, you learn to understand its behavior. Aegis did not just execute code, it reflected my methods, and I had never programmed it to be cooperative with intruders. I had spent nearly 3 decades in that office. I started as a junior network technician, back when the company occupied a small suite on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. In those early years, the founders, who were genuine engineers, understood the complexity of global data synchronization. They paid me a fair salary and let me build the systems without interference. But after they sold the company to a private equity firm, everything changed. Stephen Mercer was brought in as chief operating officer 6 years ago. He was a man who wore tailored suits, spoke in buzzwords, and immediately started cutting budgets while talking about replacing senior staff with cheaper junior resources in offshore offices. Stephen always looked at me as an expensive relic of the past, an engineer who did not care about corporate presentations or slide decks. He did not understand that the entire corporate infrastructure rested on the code I had written. The 19th floor of our headquarters was a monument to corporate excess. It was decorated with expensive glass partitions, modern art that cost more than my annual salary, and a massive mahogany conference table where the board members sat during their quarterly meetings. These board members were mostly finance executives who had never written a single line of code in their lives. They saw our software platform as a collection of numbers on a balance sheet, completely unaware of the intricate algorithms and real-time database synchronizations that kept the transactions flowing. When Stephen Mercer was appointed as COO, he spent his first month rearranging the offices to give himself a larger view of the city skyline, signaling his priorities immediately. He was more concerned with the appearance of success than the actual technical foundations of the product. He frequently held town hall meetings where he spoke about innovation and synergy, but he never bothered to visit the server rooms or speak with the engineers who actually maintained the infrastructure. I kept my head down, avoided office politics, and focused on maintaining system integrity. I mentored younger engineers like Owen, teaching them how to read the log files and understand the patterns. But I also prepared for the inevitable day when corporate greed would try to push me out. I knew my worth, even if the executives did not. My old development team, including Sarah, Brian, and Peter, were all hard-working professionals who were suddenly forced to report to a director with no practical software engineering experience. I had warned them that our systems were vulnerable to management interference, but they had families to support and could not afford to speak out. At 7:36 in the evening, the internal Slack workspace exploded. A panicking employee leaked screenshots onto an online forum, trying to explain the massive database rollback in a public thread. The description was vague but alarming. The technical team was investigating a malicious code insertion in the legacy automation kernel with no administrative bypass available, forcing a complete platform lockdown. They called it an unauthorized internal manipulation. They meant me. 12 minutes after that, the email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read "Urgent consultation request from Stephen Mercer." The text was filled with corporate panic, disguised as professional politeness. "Alan," it read, "we believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding your recent transition from the firm. We would appreciate your technical advice regarding some platform inconsistencies. Please let me know when you are available to discuss this." The word transition always smells like a corporate cover-up. I forwarded the message to my personal email address. I planned to print it out and frame it later. Then I opened the custom administrative console on my phone. Aegis was displaying an amber status indicator. It was not red, and it was not green. It meant the system was suspended, waiting for my confirmation. One tap on my screen would stabilize the Geneva servers, aligning the database nodes as if nothing had ever happened. But I did not touch the button. I had not received an apology, and they had not admitted the truth. What were they trying to duplicate? Why was there a secure network connection pinging from a remote server in Singapore using my credentials? Someone had not just terminated my contract. They had tried to copy my work and replace my identity. The Singapore connection was the key to their entire plan, and I had discovered it 3 weeks before my departure. I remembered that day with absolute clarity. It was the afternoon of our major architectural walkthrough, and Stephen's administrative assistant had accidentally scheduled a conflicting meeting, subsequently locking me out of the digital conference room. They claimed it was a minor permissions glitch, but I knew better than to trust their excuses. The glitch had a very specific identity. It was associated with a newly hired employee named Justin Cole, whose official corporate directory title was Senior Systems Strategy Analyst. His profile picture was highly polished, looking more like a marketing agent than a systems developer. He had been hired 8 weeks ago, placed in a special operations division that reported directly to Stephen Mercer. I had discovered his activity buried deep inside our development log history. An unfamiliar security key had been committing changes into the foundational database code that I had spent years writing. At first glance, his changes appeared to be minor syntax adjustments and comment cleanups. But when I analyzed the logic, I recognized the underlying intention. He was trying to rewrite the core decision engine of Aegis, attempting to train the platform to accept external commands without my security tokens. He was trying to build a duplicate of my system so they could run it without me. Justin Cole spent his days in a glass office, pretending to analyze strategic data flows, but in reality, he was copying my repositories line by line. I was working late at my home office when I noticed the anomalous pull request on the repository. The user ID was a generic operations tag, but the SSH key was registered to a Singapore IP address. I cross-referenced the server logs and found that the connection had been routed through an administrative gateway that only Stephen Mercer could access. This was not a standard deployment. It was a targeted attempt to clone the middleware code without my knowledge. Justin Cole had spent the last 2 months slowly copying the back-end modules, checking them into a separate repository. He did not know that Aegis had a shadow logging system that traced all code modifications and recorded them to a secure backup directory. When I examined the copied files, I realized they were trying to construct a replica of the platform's transaction routing engine. It was a crude copy, lacking the automated failover protocols, but it was enough to run basic operations. He did not realize that every keystroke he made was recorded by Aegis's compliance tracker. I had configured the system to log all unauthorized source modifications. They almost succeeded, but they overlooked one fundamental detail. Aegis did not trust unfamiliar signatures. I had designed the system to require specific cryptographic tokens, each one verified by my unique biometric hash and timestamped at the moment of authorization. When Justin Cole tried to bypass these security protocols by using a forged credential, Aegis did not simply reject the connection. The security watchdog protocol immediately activated, silently tracing every action Justin Cole took on the corporate network. It recorded his email correspondences, compiled his code changes, and even captured internal video conference logs. Under federal law, utilizing forged credentials to gain unauthorized access to a protected corporate network is a severe criminal offense. Specifically, it violates the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is codified under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1030. This statute carries heavy penalties, including federal prison terms for anyone who accesses systems without authorization or exceeds their permitted access. Furthermore, their plan to duplicate and copy my proprietary middleware to avoid paying my compensation directly violated the Defend Trade Secrets Act. Under Title 18, United States Code, Section 18836, they were not just managing a transition, they were committing federal computer crimes. I had registered the unique architecture of Aegis under my personal name years ago as part of my initial employment agreement, meaning the intellectual property belonged to me, not the firm. They were attempting to clone my personal property. At 9:15 in the evening, I sat in my small apartment eating a simple dinner, watching the recorded video files that Aegis had compiled. I watched Stephen Mercer and Justin Cole discussing their strategy. "We do not need his permission," Stephen was saying on the recording, his voice confident and dismissive. "We just need to copy his core middleware. Once Justin finishes replicating the data flow, we can let him go and tell the board he chose early retirement. We have already modified his stock agreements under the third quarter adjustments, and legal says we are safe." They were already celebrating their success, planning to claim my bonuses and stock options for themselves. They did not realize that every word they spoke was being recorded by the watchdog protocol. At 9:28 in the evening, I logged back into the administrative panel on my phone. The system status was still suspended. I entered a short command that I had not executed in years. It was the initiation code for the security isolation protocol. The system prompted me for a vocal confirmation. I leaned close to the microphone and spoke one word, "Initiate," across our distributed servers. Aegis went to work. The system did not crash the databases. It did something far more sophisticated and embarrassing. It began to introduce subtle inconsistencies into the duplicate system that Justin Cole had attempted to build. It added microscopic latency delays to the data packets, sending error logs into the tracking system like sugar poured into a gasoline tank. The corporate team did not notice the initial anomalies, which was exactly what I had intended. The system did not simply shut down. Instead, it executed a sequence of subtle logic alterations. It began modifying the invoice totals by small fractional percentages, ensuring that the ledger balances would not match during reconciliation. It injected microsecond delays into the API endpoints, causing the European payment gateways to time out and reject transactions. This created a massive backlog of pending invoices, clogging the database channels. The Geneva accounting team spent hours trying to find the source of the errors, but the logs generated by Aegis were perfectly formatted to mimic normal database warnings. Aegis had locked down the database schema, preventing any schema alterations or data exports. When Justin Cole tried to run an automated extraction script to copy the client tables to an external cloud server, the database engine flagged the command as a security violation. It immediately suspended the user account, revoked its privileges, and initiated a secure wipe of the temporary folders Justin had created. The console log showed that the script had failed with a permissions error, but in reality, Aegis was actively isolating the system, ensuring that no further data could be copied or exported without my direct approval. The engineering team was left staring at empty dashboards, unable to see the transaction traffic or access the system logs. As the databases began to loop, Geneva's systems started rejecting customer payments. The transactions were marked as failed due to the microsecond delays injected by Aegis. Their customer support lines were flooded with complaints, and their financial dashboard was showing millions of dollars in lost revenue. The Geneva Board of Directors called an emergency meeting and contacted our chief executive officer, demanding immediate answers. Stephen Mercer tried to blame the outage on a hardware failure, but the Geneva technical team was already analyzing the audit reports and saw that the data packets had been modified. They realized that the integrity of the data was compromised. The company's stock price began to drop in after hours, trading as news of the system failure started to spread. Internally, the DevOps team was in a panic. Gavin was trying to restore the database from an older backup, but Aegis had encrypted the backup files using a security key that only I possessed. The chief technology officer realized that they were completely locked out of their own platform, and their attempts to force a bypass were only making the system more unstable. The Geneva audit reports, recompiled with all internal timestamps, shifted by exactly 16 hours. It was a minor change, but it was more than enough to completely invalidate their fourth quarter financial filings. The remote connection in Singapore remained active, but Aegis rerouted the traffic through a virtual machine inside the company's own firewall, logging the activity under the chief executive officer's private account. The best part of the plan occurred when a message was sent to the entire technical department from a phantom Slack account named Vance Ghost. The message read, "It is interesting that you attempted to replicate the system, but forgot to copy the developer who built it." Stephen Mercer deleted the message within 3 seconds, but Owen took a screenshot and shared it with the engineering team. The Slack messages showed the sheer panic of the management team. Stephen Mercer was ordering the DevOps team to perform a hard reboot of the servers, but the reboot commands were ignored because Aegis had locked the hardware ports. By midnight, the entire executive suite was in a state of absolute chaos. The chief technology officer had flown in from the regional headquarters to manage the crisis. Justin Cole was nowhere to be found, and his corporate accounts had been disabled. My old development team, including Sarah, Brian, and Peter, were being questioned by security personnel. The Human Resources Department sent out urgent notices reminding everyone of their confidentiality agreements, while the legal team drafted emergency disclosures. Meanwhile, I was monitoring the situation through a private dashboard feed I had established months ago. The status indicator had turned dark violet, signaling that the final security protocol was armed. At 1:15 in the morning, the system executed the automated rollback. The duplicate code that Justin Cole had pushed to production was overwritten. 1,930 lines of code were replaced with automated sequences that read, "You should not have tried to erase him." The production environment went haywire. Client interfaces began displaying bizarre errors, and database queries returned nonsense results. It was a public and complete failure of the duplicated platform. Stephen Mercer called my phone at 1:45 in the morning. When I answered, his voice was tight with anger and panic. "Alan, I do not know what kind of game you are playing," he said. I interrupted him before he could continue. "Do not worry, Stephen," I said. "This is not a game. This is simply the consequence of your choices." "What do you want?" he demanded. I sent him the video file containing the recording of his meeting with Justin Cole. I waited on the line as the file transferred. I heard his breath catch, followed by a long silence, and then the quiet sound of his chair rolling back. I hung up the phone. By the next morning, the stories had already begun to circulate on technology news websites. The tech news sites had headlines like, "Software firm faces catastrophic outage amid allegations of intellectual property theft and unauthorized database duplication." The articles detailed the secret project, which was internally referred to as Operation Puppet. The Dead Man Switch had sent a complete dossier to the reporters, including the code commits, emails, and the recorded video conversation. The public exposure was complete. Recruiters from competing firms were flooding my email inbox with job offers and requests for consultation. The details of their secret project had been sent to 4 independent journalists through a Dead Man Switch I had configured before leaving. The switch was designed to trigger only if my administrative access was completely deleted and a forged signature attempted to execute system code. The package included the document files, the code modifications, and the recorded conversations between Stephen Mercer and Justin Cole. Geneva had already issued a formal demand to the company's board of directors, threatening to cancel their contract immediately. Stephen Mercer sent me a final message asking for my terms. I replied with a simple message: I will see you in your office at 9 in the morning. At 4:15 in the morning, Aegis had quietly restored my security credentials, allowing me to walk past the main security desk without any issues. The security guards nodded to me as I entered. Either unaware of my termination or too tired to care, I rode the elevator to floor 19, the executive level. I walked directly into Steven's office without knocking. He looked exhausted, his hair messy and his shirt wrinkled. I placed a red flash drive on the center of his desk. Labeled in bold print were the words "Backup" and "Restore Protocols." He stared at the drive. "Everything you lost is on this drive," I said. "The database pipelines, the client nodes, and the restoration files for Geneva." "Why are you giving this to us?" he asked, his voice low. "Because I do not care about destroying the company," I said. "I only care about protecting my work. But this drive comes with 3 conditions." He nodded slowly, waiting. Steven looked at the red flash drive as if it were a bomb. He knew that the drive contained the only way to save the company's contract with Geneva, but he also knew that accepting it meant the end of his corporate career. He tried to negotiate, asking if we could reach a financial settlement instead of his resignation. I looked him in the eye and told him that my terms were not negotiable. I told him that he had spent years treating engineers as replaceable resources, and now he was learning that some resources cannot be replaced. I explained that the evidence on the flash drive would not only clear my name, but would also expose his fraudulent activities to the Securities and Exchange Commission. He had modified my stock agreements under the third quarter adjustments to siphon off my bonuses, which constituted securities fraud. When he realized that I had compiled the complete financial records, his resistance collapsed. He sat down and began drafting his resignation letter. As I walked out of the building, I felt a deep sense of relief. I had spent 28 years protecting that system, and although I was leaving it behind, I was leaving on my own terms. The architecture of Aegis would remain a testament to my work, and the lessons they learned would ensure that they never tried to steal from an architect again. First, I want your immediate resignation announced to the board, citing management failure. Second, I want the full reinstatement of my stock options and bonuses, retroactively approved today. Third, Justin Cole's name must be entirely removed from the development history of the platform. He did not build the system, and he will not receive credit for it. If you do not sign this agreement, the remaining recorded files will be sent directly to the federal prosecutors. Steven stared at the drive for a long moment, then reached out and took it. I turned around and walked out of the office, my boots clicking against the marble floor of the lobby. That evening, I sat on my sofa and watched the official announcement of Steven's resignation. The company spokesperson thanked him for his service, and the board announced that my stock options had been restored. The next phase of my career was already beginning. I was setting up an independent consulting firm, and several major clients had already contacted me. I was no longer an employee. I was the architect of my own future. Aegis had done its job, and now it was time to build something new. In the days that followed the announcement, several former colleagues reached out to me. Sarah, Brian, and Peter asked if they could join my new consulting firm once their contracts expired. They were tired of the corporate bureaucracy and wanted to work on systems where engineering integrity was respected. I welcomed their interest, knowing that their expertise would be invaluable. We began setting up our office in a small building downtown, far away from the glass high-rises and corporate politics. We were starting small, but we had a clear vision. We would build systems that were secure, transparent, and owned by the engineers who created them. The story of Aegis had become a cautionary tale in the technology sector, a reminder that behind every successful platform is a human mind that cannot be simply cloned or replaced.